Yo, what's up, guys? Why Not Be Reckless, aka Why Not Be Casting here. I'm one of the HCS commentators, analysts, and grassroots content creators. And today we have another HCS report. We're going to be breaking down all of the Rostermania that went down from Dallas and ultimately leading up to SLC. I understand there's a lot of people that are coming back to the HCS to watch the next major, but maybe haven't kept up with all of the drama that went on online. And a lot of these teams are looking a lot different. So this is going to be a perfect video for you if you're trying to catch up here. I'm going to give you all the tea and really kind of walk you through the new teams and how they ultimately formed. So let's jump right into it. And let's start off with Optic Gaming making a big change. Obviously, Optic Gaming won back-to-back tournaments. They ain't making a single change whatsoever. I just left them up on top. The most important team we're going to talk about is actually right under them, and that's going to be FaZe and SSG really combined, because the drama that went down here is ultimately kind of what started this crazy trickle down of Rostermania that affected so many teams, which have the league looking so different. Well, it started off with a little bit of bad blood. Let's be honest. Like when the APG Rostermania streams were going down and the pros were in his chat going back and forward with each other, going, giving some information to APG and really kind of letting things off of their chest, everybody was able to see it. So the words that, for example, Eco and Stellar were saying that, for example, saying that only we could take down Optic, or they strayed away from a system that that worked for them in the past, and we're trying a new one that just wasn't working. Or even the early talks were talking about how they've done more film review than they have in their entire careers, and it still wasn't working, caused a bit of a ripple between Snakebite and Lucid, ultimately Eco and Stellar. And very similarly, on the FaZe roster, Trippy and Suppress were absolutely going at it. The rumor is that Trippy and Penguin wanted to drop Suppressed and keep Falcated, but Falcated wasn't exactly down for that and ended up telling Suppressed, and ultimately this created this little bit of a back and forth between Suppressed and Trippy, where Suppressed said the exact words of, some of us were standing still on the map, some of us were moving, kind of going at some of the play styles of his teammate and kind of alluding to, similar to SSG, where they just weren't happy with the play style that we're putting down. Some more words were thrown back and forward and whatnot. I could probably make a whole stream about that. But what ended up happening was simply almost a trade between Suppressed and Falcated going to Space Station Gaming, and then Snakebite and Lucid going to FaZe. Very simple, very clean. Now, I will say, because half the members of FaZe and SSG did end up changing, it created a little bit of a difficulty when it came to pool play ultimately for SLC, because they lost their spot. So TSM moved up to second place in pool in seed for SLC. Shopify Bunny moved up to third place, and ultimately FaZe and SSG had to compete in the qualifier to earn their spot, where FaZe elected to forfeit, and then SSG took the number one spot in points, so they took the number 4 seed going into SLC. So a lot of craziness went down there, but ultimately SSG and FaZe swap players, and that give us the FaZe and SSG that we have today. Now, going down to some of the teams that maybe finished outside of the top 4, you have a team like Complexity, where Advocacy ends up deciding that he doesn't want to compete with Complexity more, and I believe he ends up just leaving the roster and eventually finds himself on Cloud9. Now, Complexity went through a little bit of a drama themselves, and it kind of spilled over into the public, and eventually Spartan ends up dropped from this roster. Now, it seemed like at first it was only going to be Spartan on the roster along with Mental, and then it seemed like Cherish was dropped, and then some crazes went down, and like I said, eventually ends up Spartan being dropped, and he's going to eventually find himself onto Omid, but that leaves a couple of spots available for Complexity. It wasn't clear whether Cherish had his spot or not, because he was supposed to be dropped before Spartan, and then afterwards he ends up still on the roster some way, somehow. But Complexity then target YNOT and King Nick from Gen G. Bynum and King Nick end up joining this complexity roster, and they start doing incredible right off the rip. It was really exciting to see what complexity have been able to do and what they continue to be able to do as well. Watch out for the squad going into SLC. We need to find out if they're the real deal. That leaves Common and Breaking Shot without a home. Common's gonna find his way over towards Unreal Nightmare, joining his alongside duo in Haynes, where Breaking Shot is actually gonna join Spartan on this omit roster that we'll talk about a little bit later on with Spartan. And like I said, we'll talk about that a little bit later on. As of right now, Gen G, nowhere to be found, to be honest with you. Not sure exactly what's going on with Gen G. Don't know if they're still trying to field the roster, if they're waiting for the phase event, or if they're just out of Halo. I'm not exactly sure. I'm sure we'll find out more as time goes on. But that leaves Cloud9 with Advocacy. Now, there was some questions on whether Lethal or Boo Boo Doobu would have a spot on the actual roster itself. Eventually, Lethal will find his way off of Cloud9 and then onto Omit. Again, we'll talk about them a little bit later on. That leaves Boo Boo Doobu, Septify, Sab, and Advocacy. But eventually, Cloud9 not happy with that, and Septify is going to end up off of the roster as well. And I believe he actually ends up on Unreal Nightmare. I'm going to double check that real quick. And yes, he ends up on Unreal Nightmare alongside Haynes and Common. With that empty spot, Cloud9 then decide to bring in Collect. And once they bring in Collect, I started really liking this roster. I mean, they came together, hit the ground running. They've already had some good feats in 2025 as an org, but it felt like they were a little bit stagnant and maybe going on a bit of a downtrend. Since bringing on both Advocacy and especially Collect, Cloud9 have been absolutely flying, even though missing out on qualifying for the LVT Pro League. But still, after that, very good. Watch out for Cloud9, similar to Complexity. I would say Complexity, Cloud9, Envy, and TSM really feel like they're kind of in the same bracket pool, even though TSM currently hold the #2 seed in SLC. I really feel like Complexity, Cloud9, and even Envy are extremely close to them, if not at the same tier, but I'll let you guys decide that. That brings us down to our omit roster, which mortally ends up joining Unreal Nightmare after some craziness. Ezzo is going to find himself alongside 10Y. He'll be competing in the open bracket, I believe. What is it? Oh my gosh, is it? It might be Envor, Ezzo, Super CC, and Suspector. Maybe I think Suspector has rejoined. Actually, no, that was no. That might be Looney. I'll be honest with you. I know Ezzo's on a very good open bracket team. It might be Omit Black with Ice Kid. Actually, I apologize. I know Ezzo is on a top open bracket team, and I apologize for not knowing which one it is off the rip. I believe it's actually Omit Black. I'm going to double check that right now. That is a huge faux pas by me. Let's see. Yes, it's actually Omit Black. So he's going to find himself alongside Ice Kid, Lido, and Morgan. Lido and Morgan competed on the Dark Inside and have always been extremely good. I apologize. That's where he's going to end up. I don't have an actual section for Dark Inside. Sorry about that. But Ezra's going to find himself on a top open bracket team. So that leaves this new omit roster looking very similar to what Complexity looked like in early 2025. Spartan, Breaking Shot, Huss, and now instead of Precision, you have Lethal coming in to make up this omit roster. So gonna be really exciting to see what they're able to do. They've been having some ups and downs, but with this level of talent on a roster, you kind of never count them out. I have them maybe a step below Cloud9, Complexity, and Envy. But hey, anything could happen, especially on land. And then eventually Unreal Nightmare are going to take up another spot in pool play after their performance in the qualifier. They've been absolutely fantastic. Common, Haynes, Septify, and Mortally coming in. The return of Haynes, really excited to ultimately see that. You had Mortally, who was competing with also Luminosity at one point. Obviously, Septify left off of that Cloud9 roster. It's a very, very good roster and one that maybe can create upsets. But my pick as far as who to keep your eyes on, Complexity and Cloud9 as far as this group to really make some waves. We know what FaZe are going to do. We know what SSG are going to do. These two right here have so much potential to upset anybody, but at the same time, you know, when going up against players on land or teams on land, you can see that pressure create diamonds, or you can see it burst pipes. What exactly is going to happen to them? And that's really all the Rostermania that went down. Envy and TSM ultimately staying exactly the same. Same for Shopify Rebellion and even Team Nemesis. I will talk about the fact that Z10 did make a major change themselves. Jimbo retires from competing. So they end up bringing out Bastos. And I will say Z10 eventually did beat Nemesis in like the next open series, but during the qualifier, Nemesis won, so they're gonna take a higher seed ultimately in Pool B alongside FaZe and TSM. Z10, they have Bastos joining, but then Jimbo is also coming in, who comes out of retirement as a competitor, but instead of joining Nemesis or Z10, they join. He joins like the third best team in Europe and does end up qualifying for open bracket. So he retired as a competitor, but we're gonna see Jimbo still in the open bracket, which has been a long time since we have seen that. And ladies and gentlemen, that is your HCS report breaking down the Rostermania that went down, and it was plenty of it. Hopefully that helps get you back into the loop and helps prepare you for Salt Lake City. Until next time, peace out.